The night she was thrown out of the house, Eleanor Whitmore was not crying. That detail would matter later. She stood barefoot on the stone path outside the front gate, her thin cotton nightdress hanging unevenly from one shoulder, the hem already darkened where it brushed the wet ground. The air had a damp metallic bite to it, the kind that settled into the lungs and refused to warm. Somewhere down the street, a fox screamed. The sound carried too clearly, as if the world had decided there would be no soft edges tonight. Behind her, the house was still. Lights on, curtains open, no movement. The Whitmore residence had always been too large for silence, yet now it seemed to hold its breath, as though the walls themselves were listening. Eleanor wrapped her arms around her torso, not to shield herself from the cold, but to anchor herself. She noticed, with mild surprise, how steady her hands were. No shaking, no hysteria, just a dull, spreading pressure behind her ribs. The gate stood ajar. It had not been closed properly after she was pushed through it. Not guided, not escorted. The distinction mattered. Her husband, Andrew, had always been careful with appearances. Tonight was the first time he had been careless. That, too, would matter. She did not look back immediately. She knew what she would see if she did. Andrew's silhouette framed in the doorway, shoulders squared, face set in that familiar expression of patient disappointment. The look he wore when he believed he was being reasonable. Eleanor had learned long ago that Andrew Whitmore did his most decisive work while sounding calm. Instead, she looked down at her feet. One was bare. The other still wore a house slipper, navy blue, frayed at the heel. She tried to remember when she'd lost the other one. The memory refused to surface, as if it had been erased deliberately. A car passed at the end of the street. The driver slowed, glanced, then continued on. No one stopped. Of course they didn't. From the outside, the Whitmore street looked immaculate. Trimmed hedges, polished windows, discretion built into every brick. This was not a place where scenes occurred. This was not a place where a woman stood in her nightdress after midnight, locked out of her own home. Eleanor exhaled slowly. Inside the house, inside the marriage, things had been wrong for a long time. That was the truth. She would not allow herself to dress up or soften. Wrong in quiet ways. Wrong in ways that left no bruises, no raised voices, no moments dramatic enough to justify alarm. Wrong in ways that required endurance. She had been enduring for years. The argument itself had been almost disappointingly ordinary. A conversation that had begun with logistics, an email she'd found open on Andrew's laptop, a calendar entry that didn't align, a tone he used when he said her name. Eleanor had not accused him of anything outright. She rarely did. She had asked questions, reasonable ones. Andrew had answered none of them. He had moved through the house while speaking, collecting small, irrelevant items as if preparing for a trip he had no intention of taking. Keys, wallet, his watch, each movement carefully controlled. "You're tired," he had said. "You're imagining patterns where there aren't any." She had followed him into the hallway, still calm, still composed. She had learned how to do that, how to speak without giving him something he could label emotional. "I just want to understand," she had said. That was when he stopped. Andrew had turned to her slowly, as if she were a child who had finally crossed some invisible line. "You need to leave," he said. Not, "we should take a break." Not, "let's talk in the morning." Leave. Eleanor remembered the exact cadence of the word. Flat. Decided. "I'm not dressed," she had said absurdly, as if that were the most important thing. "You'll manage," Andrew replied. And then he had taken her by the arm, not violently, not gently, and guided her toward the door. She remembered thinking, with strange detachment, that he had chosen the hand that wouldn't leave marks. The door had closed behind her, with a sound too final to be accidental. The lock followed. Now, standing outside, Eleanor finally lifted her gaze and looked back at the house. Andrew was no longer visible. The curtains in the study twitched slightly, then settled. Someone was watching. The thought did not frighten her. It sharpened something. Eleanor reached into the pocket of her nightdress and touched the smooth edge of her phone. She hadn't realized she was still holding it. She checked the screen. No missed calls. No messages. She considered who she could ring. Her sister, Claire, lived 2 hours away and would panic in the wrong way, too loud, too fast, too public. Her mother would cry and ask what Eleanor had done to provoke this. Friends existed, but most of them belonged to Andrew first. Colleagues were out of the question. There was one name that surfaced uninvited: Margaret Hale. Eleanor hesitated. Margaret was not a friend. Not exactly. She was someone who noticed things. Someone who remembered conversations others forgot. Someone who had once, over a glass of wine, said quietly, "You live like you're waiting for permission." Eleanor had laughed at the time. She didn't laugh now. Before she could overthink it, she pressed call. The line rang twice. "Eleanor?" Margaret's voice came through, alert but controlled. "Is everything all right?" "No," Eleanor said. A pause. The kind that meant Margaret was already calculating. "Where are you?" Eleanor glanced back at the house one last time. The windows stared back, blank and unyielding. "Outside," she said. "I need somewhere to go." "Stay where you are," Margaret replied. "I'm coming." The call ended. Eleanor lowered the phone and stood very still. She felt exposed, but not helpless. There was a difference. One she had only recently begun to understand. As she waited, her mind drifted, not to panic, not to grief, but to inventory. The email on Andrew's laptop, the calendar entry labeled only with initials, the way his colleague, Nathan Cole, had looked away too quickly at dinner last week, the tension in the room whenever Evelyn Moore's name came up. None of it had formed a picture before. But pictures could be assembled. A car turned onto the street. Headlights swept across the pavement, illuminating Eleanor in stark white. For a brief moment, she saw herself reflected in the Whitmore's front window, pale, bare, strangely composed. She looked like someone who had already made a decision. Margaret's car pulled up beside her. The passenger door opened. "Get in," Margaret said gently. Eleanor did. As the car drove away, the Whitmore house receded into the darkness, its neat symmetry intact, its secrets undisturbed. For now. Margaret did not ask questions while she drove. That was one of the reasons Eleanor had called her. The car moved smoothly through the sleeping streets, tires whispering against damp asphalt. The heater hummed softly, filling the silence with something almost domestic. Eleanor rested her forehead briefly against the cool glass of the window and watched the houses slide past, each one containing its own quiet bargains, its own locked doors. "You can stay as long as you need," Margaret said after a few minutes. Eleanor nodded. "Thank you." Her voice sounded normal. She noticed that, too. Margaret's flat was small, warm, and deliberately impersonal. Clean lines, neutral colors. Nothing sentimental left out to be examined. Eleanor sat on the edge of the sofa while Margaret handed her a towel and an oversized jumper. "Bathroom's there," Margaret said. "I'll make some tea." Under the hot water, Eleanor finally felt the night catch up to her. Not tears, still not that, but a sudden heaviness, as if gravity had increased by degrees she couldn't quantify. She stood very still, letting the water run over her shoulders, over the thin red mark already blooming on her arm where Andrew's fingers had tightened. When she came out, Margaret had placed a mug on the table. Steam rose in lazy spirals. They sat opposite each other, knees not quite touching. "Tell me what happened," Margaret said. Eleanor chose her words carefully. She always did. "I asked questions," she said. Andrew didn't like that. Margaret waited. "He told me to leave," Eleanor continued. "And then he made sure I did." Margaret's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in recognition. "Is this the first time?" she asked. "No." "The first time he's locked you out?" Eleanor hesitated. "Yes." "That's not what I meant." Eleanor looked down into her tea. The surface trembled faintly, disturbed by her breath. "No," she said. "It's not the first time." Margaret leaned back slightly. "Has he ever hurt you?" The question was measured, professional almost. Margaret had once worked in family law. She knew how to ask without pushing. Eleanor thought of the mark on her arm, of years spent shrinking sentences, adjusting tone, erasing herself in small increments. "No," she said. Then, after a beat, not in ways that are easy to explain. Margaret accepted that. She always had a way of accepting truths that arrived incomplete. "Do you think he'll call?" Margaret asked. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. "No," she said finally, "not tonight." She was right. The phone remained silent. At precisely 6:14 a.m., Eleanor's screen lit up, not with a call, but with a message. "Andrew, we'll discuss this later. You embarrassed yourself last night." The words sat there, neat and unyielding. "Embarrassed yourself? Not us, not me." Eleanor stared at the message for a long time. Then she placed the phone face down on the table. Margaret watched her closely. "You don't have to go back," she said. "I know," Eleanor replied. But they both understood that knowledge and action were different things. By mid-morning, exhaustion began to erode Eleanor's clarity. It crept in quietly, blurring edges, making the past seem negotiable. She lay on the spare bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying fragments of her life with Andrew. Not the worst moments, but the good ones, or what passed for good. The dinners where he held her chair, the charity events where he introduced her with pride, the way people spoke about him with admiration, trust, certainty. "He's solid," they said, "reliable." Andrew Whitmore was a man people believed. That belief had sustained him. It had trapped her. Eleanor checked her phone again. No new messages, no missed calls. The silence felt intentional now, like a strategy. She imagined Andrew in the house moving through rooms that no longer held her presence, correcting small details, restoring order. He would tell people she was unwell, overwhelmed, dramatic. He would sound concerned. By noon, another message arrived. "Andrew, you should come home. This isn't helping." Not "I'm sorry." Not "let's talk." Helping whom? Eleanor typed a response, deleted it, typed again. Finally, she wrote, "I need time." The reply came faster than she expected. "Andrew." Time for what, Eleanor? The question was sharper than it looked. Time to accuse him? Time to expose something? Time to leave? She didn't answer. Instead, she opened the email app. Andrew's laptop had been unlocked the night before. That had been unusual. He was meticulous about security. Eleanor had noticed the open inbox only because the screen had timed out while she stood there, and she'd reached to tap the mouse. One subject line had caught her eye before Andrew noticed and closed the laptop. Confirmation attached. At the time, she had dismissed it. She had been trained to dismiss things. Now, she searched Andrew's name. The results populated slowly, methodically. There it was. The same subject line. The sender's name meant nothing to her, but the attachment icon did. Eleanor hesitated. This was the moment where curiosity became choice. She opened the email. The attachment was a scanned document. A property agreement. Recently dated. Signed. Not by Andrew alone. Another name appeared beside his. Evelyn Moore. Eleanor felt something shift, not shock, exactly, but alignment. Pieces settling into place. Evelyn Moore was not a stranger. She was a board member, a donor, a woman whose laugh lingered too long in rooms Andrew occupied, a woman who had once touched Eleanor's arm and said, "You're lucky. Andrew is rare." Rare indeed. Eleanor scrolled further. The property address was not unfamiliar. It was the townhouse Andrew claimed was an investment opportunity. One he insisted Eleanor had no reason to worry about. One she had never visited. The realization arrived without theatrics. Andrew was building a life that did not include her, and he had assumed she would never notice. Eleanor locked the phone and sat very still. She felt foolish for doubting herself, for waiting so long, for believing endurance was the same as strength. She also felt something else. Resolve. The doorbell rang at exactly 2:30 p.m. Margaret looked up from the kitchen. "Are you expecting someone?" Eleanor shook her head. Margaret frowned, then moved toward the door cautiously. Eleanor followed, heart steady but alert. Through the peephole, Margaret exhaled sharply. "It's Andrew." Eleanor did not move. "I'll handle it," Margaret said. "No," Eleanor replied quietly. "I will." She opened the door. Andrew Whitmore stood there impeccably dressed, as if for a meeting, calm, polished, concern etched carefully onto his face. "Eleanor," he said, "you look tired." She met his gaze without flinching. "You locked me out," she said. Andrew smiled faintly. "You left." "That's not what happened. This isn't the place for this conversation," he replied smoothly. His eyes flicked briefly to Margaret, then back to Eleanor. "You're upset. Let's go home." Home. The word felt altered now. Eleanor took a breath. "Who is Evelyn Moore to you?" Andrew's expression changed just slightly. A flicker. A recalibration. "She's a colleague," he said. "And the townhouse?" Eleanor asked. "Is that for work too?" The silence stretched. Andrew's voice lowered. "You've been snooping." "I've been paying attention," Eleanor replied. "That's the same thing," he said sharply. Then he softened his tone, reassembling himself. "You're misunderstanding things. As usual." Eleanor stepped back, allowing the door to remain open but barring his entry. "No," she said. "I'm done misunderstanding." Andrew's patience thinned. It showed now. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You don't understand the consequences of this." Eleanor looked at him, really looked, at the man who believed certainty was the same as power. "Oh," she said quietly, "I do." Andrew's jaw tightened. "If you don't come back now, Eleanor, this stops being private." That was the threat. Eleanor nodded slowly. "Good." Andrew stared at her. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. She closed the door. The click of the lock echoed through the flat. Eleanor leaned back against the door, heart pounding not with fear, but with something dangerously close to freedom. Behind her, Margaret exhaled. That was brave. Eleanor closed her eyes. "No," she said. "That was necessary." Outside, Andrew stood for a moment, longer than he intended to. Then he turned and walked away. And with that, any illusion of safety Eleanor had once lived under was gone. The flat felt different, once the door had closed behind Andrew. Not safer, just altered. As if something essential had been removed, leaving a pressure imbalance behind. Eleanor slid down until she was sitting on the floor, her back against the wood, knees drawn loosely to her chest. She listened for footsteps in the hallway, for the lift, for the street below. Nothing. Margaret did not speak. She understood that this was not a moment to fill. After a while, Eleanor stood and went to the sink. She rinsed her mug, though it was already clean, watched the water bead, and disappear down the drain. The small domestic motion steadied her more than rest would have. "He came prepared," Margaret said finally. "Not as an accusation, as an observation." "Yes," Eleanor replied. "He always does." Margaret crossed her arms. "He didn't expect resistance." "No." They shared a look quiet, deliberate, the kind exchanged between people who understood that something had tipped and that it could not be put back the way it was. Margaret hesitated. "What are you going to do now?" Eleanor considered the question, not in terms of answers, but in terms of permission. "I'm going to find out how long this has been happening," she said. "And who knows?" Margaret nodded slowly. "That's a dangerous path." "I know. And you're still choosing it." "Yes." Margaret studied her for a moment longer. "Then you shouldn't do it alone." That evening, Eleanor slept for nearly 10 hours. When she woke, it was with the peculiar clarity that sometimes followed collapse. Not relief, not peace, but sharpness. Her thoughts aligned more quickly. Her body felt quieter, as if it had stopped bracing for impact that had already occurred. She checked her phone. 3 messages, all from Andrew. Andrew, we need to speak like adults. Andrew, you're escalating this unnecessarily. Andrew, please stop involving other people. The last one was almost amusing. Other people. Margaret, who had not spoken to anyone. Eleanor, who had said nothing publicly. Andrew was already managing the narrative. She didn't respond. Instead, she dressed carefully, not elegantly, but deliberately. Jeans, a neutral blouse, shoes with solid soles. She tied her hair back and applied minimal makeup, just enough to look unremarkable. She had learned the value of that, too. Margaret watched from the doorway. "Where are you going?" "To see Nathan Cole," Eleanor said. Margaret's eyebrows lifted slightly. "You're sure?" "No," Eleanor replied. "But I'm curious." Nathan Cole worked 2 floors below Andrew in the same building operations, compliance, oversight. The man who had looked away at dinner. The man whose discomfort had registered only in hindsight. Eleanor took the train into the city alone. The building's lobby smelled of polished stone and expensive restraint. Security nodded at her without recognition. Andrew's badge opened doors, not hers. Still, she signed in under her own name and took the lift. Nathan's office was smaller than Andrew's. Less glass, more paper, a man who needed to prove diligence rather than authority. When Eleanor appeared in his doorway, his expression flickered through surprise, then calculation. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "is everything all right?" "No," Eleanor replied calmly, "but that's not why I'm here." She closed the door behind her. Nathan gestured to a chair. She remained standing. "I saw the property agreement," she said. He blinked. "Once." "That document is confidential," he said. "So is my marriage," Eleanor replied. And yet, silence settled between them. Nathan leaned back, rubbing his thumb against the edge of his desk. "Andrew didn't tell me you knew." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." Eleanor waited. "You need to understand," Nathan said carefully, "that some arrangements are strategic." "Whose strategy?" Eleanor asked. Nathan exhaled. "Evelyn's, mostly. Andrew benefits." "And I?" Eleanor said. Nathan looked at her then, really looked. Not with pity, but with something closer to regret. "You were never part of the plan," he said. The words landed cleanly. No apology, no justification. Just fact. Eleanor nodded once. "How long?" Nathan hesitated, then checked the closed door, as if the room itself might betray him. 18 months, he said. Eleanor absorbed that. 18 months of dinners, of conversations, of quiet erasures. "Does anyone else know?" she asked. Nathan's answer came too quickly. "No." She held his gaze. He corrected himself. "Not officially." "Names," Eleanor said. Nathan hesitated longer this time. "Evelyn's legal counsel," he said. "1 or 2 board members." And he stopped. "And?" Eleanor pressed. "And someone in finance," he said. "A woman, Claire Reynolds." Eleanor felt the name register, not recognition, but filing. "Thank you," she said. Nathan frowned. "You shouldn't thank me." "No," Eleanor replied, "but I will remember that you told the truth when it mattered." She left without shaking his hand. Outside, the city moved as it always did, unaware, indifferent, relentless. Eleanor stood on the pavement and breathed. This was no longer about infidelity. It was about architecture, about how lives were dismantled quietly, efficiently, by people who believed consequence belonged only to others. Her phone rang. Andrew. She let it ring. Then, finally, she answered. "What are you doing?" he asked. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Paying attention." There was a pause on the line. "You think you've won something," Andrew said. "No," Eleanor replied. "I think you've underestimated me." "That's the same thing," he said. "No," she corrected gently. "It never is." She ended the call. For the first time since the night he locked her out, Eleanor felt not exposed but positioned. And somewhere else in the city, Evelyn Moore was being informed that Eleanor Whitmore was no longer behaving as expected. The game, long hidden, had finally acknowledged its players. Eleanor did not go back to Margaret's flat after leaving the city. Instead, she walked. Not aimlessly, purpose had already begun to shape her steps, but without destination precise enough to be traced. She moved through streets where no one knew her name, where Andrew's reputation did not arrive before her. The anonymity felt like oxygen. By early evening, her phone vibrated again. Not Andrew. Claire Reynolds. Eleanor stopped. She did not answer immediately. She read the name once, then again, as if repetition might alter its meaning. Nathan's voice echoed faintly in her memory. Someone in finance. A woman. Claire Reynolds. She answered on the third ring. Eleanor Whitmore, Claire said brightly. Too brightly. I was hoping you'd call. I didn't, Eleanor replied. A fractional pause. Then, laughter light, practiced. Of course. I meant, it's good to hear your voice. Why are you calling me? Eleanor asked. Another pause, longer this time. I heard there's been some tension, Claire said. I thought perhaps I could help smooth things over. Between whom? You and Andrew, Claire replied, as if no other interpretation were possible. Eleanor leaned against a lamppost. The metal was cold through her sleeve. And Evelyn? She asked. The silence that followed was not accidental. I don't know what you think you know, Claire said carefully, but this isn't something you want to misunderstand. There's that word again, Eleanor said. It seems popular lately. Claire sighed, letting concern seep into her tone. Andrew is under a lot of pressure. So is Evelyn. This situation is complex. Complex for whom? Eleanor asked. For everyone, Claire said. Except perhaps you. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. Then let me simplify it, she said. Tell Evelyn Moore that if she wants to continue pretending I don't exist, she should have chosen a different husband. Claire inhaled sharply. Eleanor! Good night, Claire. She ended the call. Evelyn Moore did not call that night. She waited. Evelyn Moore was a woman who understood timing. The next day unfolded with a quiet relentlessness that felt almost kind in its predictability. Eleanor met with a solicitor recommended by Margaret. A woman named Judith Pike, gray-haired, unsentimental, and precise. Judith listened without interruption, fingers steepled, eyes sharp. When did the property purchase occur? Judith asked. 3 weeks ago, Eleanor replied. And your name was not included. No. Judith nodded once. Then we proceed carefully. Carefully, Eleanor repeated. Yes, Judith said. Because men like your husband don't panic. They reposition. That word again. Reposition. Eleanor left the office with a folder under her arm and a sense of the ground narrowing beneath her feet. Legal language offered clarity, but not comfort. It stripped emotion down to liability, betrayal down to documentation. By the time she reached the pavement, another message had arrived. Andrew, you spoke to Nathan. Not a question. Eleanor typed back, you left your laptop unlocked. The reply came almost instantly. Andrew, you're forcing my hand. She stared at the words. Forcing, as if this were a reaction, not a choice. She slipped the phone into her bag and kept walking. The first article appeared 2 days later. It was small, buried, framed as concern. Andrew's photograph accompanied the piece, composed, earnest, vaguely wounded. The article mentioned marital strain, emotional fatigue, the importance of privacy. Eleanor's name appeared once. New details, new accusations. Just implication. By evening, messages began to arrive. Carefully worded. Sympathetic. Thinking of you. Hope you're taking care of yourself. Let me know if you need anything. Nothing asked. Nothing offered. Margaret read the article twice, then folded the paper neatly. He's building insulation, she said. Yes, Eleanor replied. So am I. But insulation worked both ways. When Eleanor tried to access the joint account, it flagged. Temporary restriction. Judith was unsurprised. It's legal, she said. And strategic. And vindictive, Eleanor added. Yes, Judith agreed. That too. Eleanor adjusted. She canceled subscriptions, rerouted payments, began operating in cash when necessary. It was not hardship, it was message. Andrew wanted her contained. What he underestimated was her capacity for patience. The invitation arrived on heavy cream paper. The Moore Foundation annual private benefactors dinner. Eleanor's name was printed clearly. Not Andrew's. Not as his guest. As her own? Margaret read the card slowly. That's interesting. It's deliberate, Eleanor said. Yes. Margaret agreed. The question is why? Eleanor turned the card over. A handwritten note had been added at the bottom. I think it's time we spoke properly. Evelyn Moore never did anything without witnesses. The dinner was held in a restored townhouse, the same one Andrew had claimed was an investment. Eleanor recognized it the moment the car stopped outside. Inside, the rooms glowed with curated warmth, low laughter, controlled elegance, power arranged as intimacy. Evelyn greeted Eleanor personally. She was taller than Eleanor expected, poised, impeccably calm. You came, Evelyn said. Yes, Eleanor replied. You invited me. Evelyn smiled. I wondered if you would. They sat at opposite ends of the table. Andrew was not present. That, Eleanor realized, was the point. During dessert, Evelyn stood and raised her glass. I'd like to thank everyone here for their continued support, she said smoothly, and for their discretion. A ripple of amusement passed through the room. Eleanor met Evelyn's gaze. Later, in the side room, Evelyn finally spoke plainly. You're handling this with restraint, Evelyn said. I respect that. That wasn't your concern before, Eleanor replied. No, Evelyn agreed. Before, you were irrelevant. There it was. Eleanor did not flinch. I'm not here to take your husband, Evelyn continued. I'm here to correct a miscalculation. Which one? Eleanor asked. The assumption, Evelyn said, that you would disappear quietly. Eleanor studied her. You built something with him, Evelyn went on. Something functional, useful. I don't intend to dismantle it, just to live inside it, Eleanor said. Evelyn smiled faintly. If that's how you choose to see it, and what do you want from me? Eleanor asked. Evelyn's eyes sharpened. Your cooperation. The word landed like a blade. The following week, Eleanor's access to Andrew's professional network vanished entirely. Emails bounced, meetings canceled, doors closed politely. Judith called it escalation. Margaret called it war. Eleanor called it confirmation. But the real blow came quietly. A document surfaced, unsigned, unattributed, questioning Eleanor's mental stability. Old therapy appointments reframed. Stress reinterpreted as volatility. A narrative assembling itself without her consent. Andrew was not attacking her character. He was erasing her credibility. When Eleanor confronted him by phone, his voice was calm. You're spiraling, he said. People are worried. People you briefed? Eleanor replied. I'm protecting you, Andrew said. From what? From yourself. She ended the call, shaking for the first time. Not from fear. From rage? The final piece arrived by courier. A draft settlement. Generous, clinical, final, in exchange for silence. Eleanor sat at Margaret's table, the document spread before her. This is the moment, Margaret said quietly, where they expect you to break. Eleanor traced a finger along the signature line. No, she said. This is the moment they expect me to accept. She folded the papers carefully and smiled. Because what Andrew and Evelyn had failed to understand, what men and women like them always failed to understand, was that Eleanor Whitmore had not survived years of quiet erasure to surrender at the first offer of comfort. She had been learning, watching, waiting, and now, with everything stripped away, there was nothing left for them to take, only truths left to surface. Eleanor did not sleep that night, not because she was afraid, but because her mind had stopped negotiating. She lay awake on the narrow bed in Margaret's spare room, listening to the building settle, to pipes sighing behind walls, to the distant hush of traffic. The settlement papers rested, folded on the bedside table. She had not thrown them away. She had not torn them up. She had kept them intact. Evidence was only useful if it remained whole. Just before dawn, Eleanor rose and dressed quietly. She moved with a precision that surprised even her, each decision already made before her hands executed it. She packed a small bag, not clothing, documents, copies, a notebook Margaret had given her weeks earlier, and which Eleanor had barely touched. She began writing now, not feelings, facts, dates, names, shifts in behavior. The first time Andrew corrected her in public. The first time money became conditional. The first time she realized silence had become her default response. Patterns revealed themselves when laid flat. By mid-morning, Margaret found her at the kitchen table. "You look like someone who's crossed a line," Margaret said gently. "I have," Eleanor replied. "I just haven't told anyone yet." Margaret poured coffee. "What's the plan?" Eleanor closed the notebook. "I'm going to stop reacting." Margaret waited. "They've controlled every narrative so far by anticipating my response," Eleanor continued. "Emotion, protest, collapse. That's what they've prepared for." "And instead?" Margaret asked. Eleanor met her gaze. "I'm going to do nothing." Margaret smiled faintly. "That will terrify them." It began with absence. Eleanor stopped answering messages altogether. Not just Andrew's, everyone's. She didn't issue statements. She didn't correct misinformation. She didn't defend herself. The silence unsettled people. Andrew called twice the first day, 3 times the second. By the third, his messages shifted tone. "Andrew, this isn't helping you." Then, "Andrew, we can still resolve this quietly." Then, finally, "Andrew, you're making me look unreasonable." That one, Eleanor read twice. "Making me look." The phrasing mattered. Meanwhile, Judith worked. Subtly, methodically. Requests filed not as accusations, but as clarifications. Financial records requested under the guise of compliance. Emails retrieved. Timelines aligned. "Evelyn Moore is careful," Judith said during one meeting. "But she's not sentimental. She assumes leverage works on everyone." "And Andrew?" Eleanor asked. Judith's mouth tightened. "Andrew assumes authority is permanent." Neither assumption, Eleanor realized, had ever been tested until now. The first crack appeared where Eleanor least expected it. Nathan Cole emailed her directly. No greeting, no pleasantries. "They're moving faster than planned. Evelyn is nervous. Andrew is furious." Eleanor read the message once, then again. She did not reply. An hour later, another email arrived. "If this goes public, they'll sacrifice someone. It won't be Evelyn." "That one," she answered. "Then you should decide who you want to be remembered as." The reply took longer. "What do you want?" Eleanor considered the question. "The truth," she typed. "In your words." It came 3 days later. A file, password protected, time-stamped. Nathan's testimony emails, internal memos, messages that revealed coordination, intent, strategy, language stripped of politeness, decisions made with chilling clarity. Andrew's name appeared often, not as mastermind, as executor. Eleanor read everything. She did not cry. She did not smile. She forwarded the file to Judith. Then she closed her laptop and went for a walk. Evelyn Moore requested a meeting the following morning. Not an invitation this time. A summons. The townhouse felt colder without guests. Its warmth, Eleanor realized, had always been performative. Evelyn stood near the window when Eleanor entered. "You've been quiet," Evelyn said. "Yes," Eleanor replied. "That wasn't part of the arrangement." "There was no arrangement," Eleanor said. "There was an expectation." Evelyn turned. "You're destabilizing things." "I was never stable within them," Eleanor replied. Evelyn studied her more carefully now. Not as an obstacle, but as an unknown. What do you want? Evelyn asked again. Eleanor's voice was calm. I want my name back. Evelyn's lips pressed together. You're asking for too much. No, Eleanor said. I'm asking for too late. The words landed. Evelyn exhaled. Andrew won't forgive this. I don't require his forgiveness, Eleanor replied. Only his absence. For the first time, irritation broke Evelyn's composure. You think you can dismantle what we've built? She asked. Eleanor met her gaze evenly. No, I think you'll dismantle it yourselves. Andrew did not hear it from Eleanor. He heard it from his board. A temporary step back. A review process. A need for distance. Words he had once used on others. He called Eleanor immediately. You did this, he said. Yes, Eleanor replied. You've destroyed everything, he said. No, she corrected softly. I stopped protecting it. Silence crackled on the line. You think this makes you powerful? Andrew asked. No, Eleanor said. It makes me free. She ended the call. In the weeks that followed, the narrative shifted. Not dramatically, not publicly, quietly. Andrew Whitmore became complicated. Evelyn Moore became private. Eleanor Whitmore became unavailable. And in that unavailability, something remarkable happened. People began to listen. Judith filed the final papers on a Tuesday morning. The settlement Eleanor signed bore little resemblance to the first. Her name restored. Her finances untangled. Her silence unpurchased. When Margaret read it, she let out a long breath. You won. Eleanor shook her head. No, I stopped losing. The last time Eleanor returned to the Whitmore house was months later. Not to reclaim it, to empty it. Andrew was not there. She moved through rooms that no longer recognized her, collecting what remained hers, not objects, but acknowledgments. A book she'd once loved, a photograph that proved she had existed there. Before leaving, she stood in the doorway. The house was still, lights off, curtains drawn, no one watching. She closed the door gently. Outside, the air was cool and clean. The street looked as immaculate as ever. But Eleanor Whitmore was no longer part of its illusion. She walked away without looking back. And this time, she did not carry anything she would need to return. Freedom, Eleanor discovered, was not loud. It did not arrive with relief or celebration. There was no moment where the air cleared or the weight lifted cleanly from her chest. No triumphant breath drawn at an open window. It arrived the way bruises faded gradually, unevenly, sometimes tender to the touch, long after the injury itself had healed. Not gone, just no longer visible. Some mornings, she woke and waited for the familiar pressure to return. The internal inventory, the silent calculation of mood, consequence, tone. When it didn't arrive, she felt briefly unmoored, as though something essential had been forgotten. In the weeks after the legal disentanglement, Eleanor moved through her days with an unfamiliar autonomy that felt almost artificial, like a language she understood intellectually but had not yet learned to speak fluently. She stood in doorways deciding where to go without consulting anyone. She paused over shop windows and went inside without rehearsing an explanation. She spent money without justification. She slept when tired. She woke when ready. These choices should have felt ordinary. Instead, they felt deliberate, almost rebellious, as if each one carried a small risk she could not quite name. She would stop mid-step on the pavement sometimes, suddenly aware of her own stillness. No one was watching. No one was waiting. No correction followed. And yet, the reflexes remained. She still caught herself rehearsing explanations for decisions no one had questioned, still paused before speaking, measuring tone, trimming edges, softening certainty, still adjusted her posture in rooms where no authority was present. Years of adaptation did not dissolve simply because the conditions that required them had ended. The body remembered what the mind had already released. Margaret noticed first. "You apologize before you enter rooms," Margaret said one evening, standing at the kitchen counter. wine glass untouched in her hand. Her voice was gentle, observational. Eleanor frowned. "I do?" "Yes," Margaret replied. "Not with words, with posture." Eleanor sat with that longer than she expected. The idea unsettled her in a way accusations never had. That night, she stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, not examining herself for flaws, not adjusting hair or smoothing fabric, just looking, searching for evidence. She studied the set of her shoulders, how they curved inward slightly, as if bracing, the habitual tension at the base of her neck, the way her jaw tightened without instruction, as though preparing for impact that never arrived. She watched herself breathe shallow, careful, contained. The person looking back at her was not broken, but she was patterned. Some patterns were survivals. Some were cages. Andrew disappeared from her daily consciousness slowly, not because he became irrelevant overnight, but because the emotional architecture that had once held him central began to collapse from lack of maintenance. There was no dramatic severing, no single decisive release, just erosion. His presence thinned, his authority weakened. His voice, once omnipresent, arrived now only as echo phrases surfacing uninvited, stripped of force, reduced to sound without consequence. "You're being difficult. You're overreacting. This isn't helping." They hovered briefly, then dissolved. They sounded smaller without him attached to them, less like truth, more like residue, something left behind after damage, not the damage itself. Judith kept Eleanor informed when necessary. Andrew had accepted a consultancy role abroad, a repositioning, again, temporary, officially, indefinite in practice. Eleanor noted the phrasing, the careful ambiguity, and moved on. Evelyn Moore remained in place. For now, Nathan Cole did not fare as well. His cooperation, once suspected, became quietly confirmed. There were no announcements, no scandal. He was not fired that would have implied guilt in the wrong direction. Instead, he was transitioned, a graceful exit, a recommendation letter that said everything except trusted, a career adjusted, not ended. He emailed Eleanor once more. "I did what you asked." She read it twice, then replied, "You did what you could." He did not respond. Eleanor wondered briefly whether she should feel responsible. The thought passed through her like a draft and left no mark. Responsibility implied ownership. Nathan had chosen his own terms long before she entered the equation. She would not inherit consequences that were never hers to carry. The silence that followed was different from the one that had preceded her exile. That earlier silence had demanded endurance. It had pressed inward, required compression, restraint, disappearance. It had punished presence. This one did not demand anything. It offered space. Eleanor moved into a smaller flat, sunlit, imperfect, unmistakably hers. The floors creaked when she walked. The windows resisted when opened. The walls bore faint marks from other lives. She left boxes unpacked longer than necessary, stacks of books resting on the floor, frames leaning against walls instead of hanging. She allowed herself to live amid incompletion. Nothing needed to be immediately resolved. Nothing waited on approval. She began seeing a therapist again, not to repair herself, but to unlearn. "It's strange," Eleanor said during one session, fingers loosely knotted in her lap, eyes fixed on a point just beyond the window. "I don't miss him. I miss the version of myself I thought I was becoming." The therapist nodded. "That's often harder to grieve." "Yes," Eleanor agreed quietly, "because that person never actually existed." The truth of it settled gently. No collapse followed. No revelation demanded tears. Just understanding. The confrontation Eleanor did not anticipate came months later. Not from Andrew, from Evelyn. The message arrived without ceremony. "We should speak, in person." Eleanor read it once, set the phone down, picked it up again. She waited a full day, not out of strategy, not as leverage, but out of instinct. Then she replied with a single word. "Where?" They met in a quiet cafe, unremarkable, chosen deliberately for its lack of symbolism. No power, no spectacle, neutral ground, small tables, soft light, the muted clatter of cups. Evelyn looked unchanged at first glance, composed, controlled, impeccable. But something in her posture had shifted a tension at the shoulders, an impatience that had not been there before. Resistance, not command. "You've cost me time," Evelyn said without preamble. Eleanor stirred her coffee slowly, watching the surface darken, then settle. "Time isn't currency to you," she said. "Control is." Evelyn's lips curved slightly. "You're sharper than you used to be." "I'm quieter," Eleanor replied. "It leaves room for listening." Evelyn leaned back. Andrew was a liability. "Yes," Eleanor said, "but a useful one, until he wasn't." "And now?" Eleanor asked. Evelyn met her gaze. "Now you are." The admission hung between them clean, unembellished. "I don't want anything from you," Eleanor said calmly. "That's what makes you dangerous," Evelyn replied. "People who want nothing are difficult to manage." Eleanor smiled faintly. "You mistake detachment for threat." "Do I?" "Yes, because I'm not trying to replace you, or expose you, or bargain with you." "What are you trying to do then?" Eleanor's voice did not rise. "I'm refusing to orbit you." For the first time, something like irritation surfaced in Evelyn's eyes. "You think this ends with you?" "No," Eleanor replied. "I think it ends with me not caring how it continues." They stood. Evelyn hesitated, then spoke once more. "Andrew loved you, in his way." Eleanor paused only long enough to consider the truth of it. That's the problem with his way. It always required someone else to disappear. She left without looking back. Time passed. Not neatly, not evenly. Andrew remarried quietly. Evelyn expanded her foundation. The world continued its preference for tidy conclusions. Eleanor did not provide one. She changed careers not dramatically, but decisively. She began consulting independently, advising organizations on governance, ethics, accountability, sitting across tables, listening, asking questions that could not be smoothed away. People listened, not because of what had been done to her, but because of what she had chosen to do afterward. Margaret moved cities. They remained close messages, visits, shared silences. On a late autumn evening, Eleanor walked alone through a park. Leaves crushed softly underfoot. The air carried the clean sharpness of approaching winter. She stopped briefly, watching a woman ahead of her laugh loudly, unapologetically, head tipped back without calculation. The sound startled her, then warmed her. The night Eleanor Whitmore was thrown out of her house, she was not crying. Months later, standing in a life she had built without permission, she understood why. Tears belonged to endings that still asked for mercy. This one never had. She walked on. She did not hurry. That was the first thing she noticed. The pavement curved gently ahead, disappearing behind a line of bare trees. Streetlights flickered on one by one, not dramatically, just doing their work. Eleanor adjusted her coat against the cold and continued walking. Her footsteps uncounted, unobserved. For years, movement had always been in response to something. A summons, a schedule, a correction waiting to happen. Now, it was simply motion. She passed a cafe closing for the night. Chairs stacked, lights dimmed. A man inside wiped down the counter with methodical care. No one looked up. No one knew her. The anonymity settled around her like a coat she hadn't realized she'd been missing. At the corner, she stopped not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She stood there long enough to feel the cold seep through the soles of her shoes, long enough to notice the rhythm of her own breathing without adjusting it. In the window beside her, her reflection appeared faintly, older than she remembered, straighter than she expected. The same woman, rearranged. She touched the glass briefly, then stepped away. Later, in her flat, she left the lights off and opened the window instead. The city breathed back at her distant traffic, a siren far enough away to be meaningless, someone laughing somewhere below. life continuing without commentary. She placed her keys on the table, not carefully, not carelessly, just there. For the first time in years, she did not replay the day before sleeping. No inventory, no post-mortem, no quiet self-cross-examination. Sleep arrived without negotiation. Morning came softly. Light crept across the wall, catching dust in the air, illuminating the half-unpacked boxes like something unfinished but not urgent. Eleanor stood at the sink, hands wrapped around a mug, watching steam rise and dissolve. Her phone lay face down on the table. It did not buzz. She did not check it. Later, she sat at her desk, an ordinary desk, second-hand, slightly scarred. She opened her notebook and wrote nothing for a while, just sat, thinking not of what came next, but of what no longer followed her. No one needed convincing. No one needed managing. No one needed her silence. When she finally wrote, it was not a plan, just a line. This is mine. She closed the notebook. Outside, the street filled slowly. A woman walked past, talking to herself through headphones. A child dragged a stick along a fence, counting the gaps. Somewhere, a door slammed and then reopened, laughter spilling out after it. Eleanor watched until the moment passed. She did not narrate it. She did not assign meaning. She simply lived inside it. Much later weeks, perhaps months, someone would ask her if she was happy. She would pause, not because the question was difficult, but because it required translation. And then she would answer honestly. "I'm here," she would say. That would be enough. The last image is simple. Eleanor Whitmore, walking into a day that does not know her history and does not require it. No audience, no verdict, no permission, just forward motion. And the quiet, unremarkable certainty that this time, she is not leaving something behind. She is arriving. The frame holds for a moment longer than expected. Not on Eleanor's face, but on the space she leaves behind. The pavement where her footsteps had been settles back into stillness. The cafe door clicks shut. The streetlight hums. Nothing marks her passing. Nothing needs to. She walks on. The day unfolds without ceremony. Morning becomes afternoon without instruction. Eleanor moves through it, unremarked, crossing a street when the light changes, waiting when it doesn't. She buys bread from a corner shop, nods once at the cashier, accepts the receipt she doesn't need. Her hands no longer tremble when they are idle. At a park bench, she sits for a while, not resting, just being still. A man nearby scrolls through his phone. A woman jogs past with a dog straining at the leash. The ordinary choreography of strangers continues, indifferent and intact. Eleanor lets it. She thinks, briefly, of the version of herself who would have cataloged this moment, assigned it weight, searched it for signs. That woman would have mistaken observation for control. This one does not. When the breeze shifts, she adjusts her coat and stands. The motion is automatic, unconsidered. Her body knows what to do now without instruction. Later, back in her flat, she opens a cupboard and finds a mug she hasn't used yet. It's imperfect, slightly chipped at the rim. She considers replacing it. Then she doesn't. She pours tea into it anyway. The window remains open. The city continues. Night arrives without confrontation. No messages follow her into it. No memory demands accounting. When she turns off the lamp, the room holds its shape. She sleeps. Not deeply, not lightly, just enough. By somely this that is passus Paul devore you now, and belusus Paul devore you now. Weeks pass, then more. Eleanor's life does not resolve into a single narrative. It resists summarization. Some days are quiet, some are restless. Some feel like beginnings, others like pauses. None feel like retreat. She learns which silences are empty and which are full. She learns that peace is not the absence of noise, but the absence of threat. One evening, as she locks her door and steps back into the street, she catches her reflection again, this time in a darkened shop front. The image is fleeting. She doesn't stop. She doesn't need to confirm herself anymore. The camera follows her for a few steps, then slows. She keeps going. The world does not close in around her. It opens incrementally, without announcement. And somewhere behind her, unnoticed and unrecorded, the last expectation of who she was supposed to be quietly lets go. Eleanor Whitmore moves forward, not toward something promised, not away from something lost, just forward. And the story having finally learned how to release her ends not with a conclusion, but with continuity. Fade out. Thank you for watching. Your trust, your time, and your support truly mean everything. If this video brought you value, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps this channel reach those who need it most. Stay focused, keep growing, and I'll see you in the next video.